2007, a little game releases, Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl. The game ended up being so captivating that whenever you hear somebody talk about post-apocalyptic setting, well, Stalker is always mentioned by at least somebody in the crowd, and for a good reason. Now, in reality though, the game was rushed and quite cut down. In fact, Lost Alpha mod is more or less what the game was planned and developed. Even so, the Soviet-era time capsule that is Chernobyl exclusion zone, possibly the most dangerous area outside of, well, a literal war zone, to man and beast alike, was recreated, so that anyone could stroll around and irradiate themselves to their heart's content. Today, the 3 games that released in late 2000s have spawned a rather big cult following. In fact, this year I tried my hand in playing Airsoft for recreation, and also to keep myself in a shape that doesn't resemble an average American. And Stalker's influence in this sport especially is felt everywhere. But what makes this Slav shooter so special? Well, come with me and I'll share a little bit of my personal love for this FPS series. Right then, so I'm making this weeks before Stalker 2 is releasing, so whether or not the game succeeds or falls flat on its face is really not today's concern. If you never touch any of the Stalker games, I want to try and give you a good reason to. But if you played it, come and join this good old circle jerk around the campfire. So, what made Stalker so goddamn beautiful? Now, in the great TheYamiks Gaming Book of Excellence, there are several tiers or levels that a game can occupy when it comes to the feeling of immersion. Lowest one is disjointed, where the game actively reminds you that you're playing a game, even disruptively so.
Perfect. You're really late. We were starting to get worried.
Just go with it, no shooting.
Then there are okay feeling games that try not to convince you nor actively sabotage the tone of the world you're going for. Then you have the gaming journal bloggerist immersive games that pretend or try to convince you that it's something more than it actually is. I pretty much think of any third-person game, especially made by Ubiconic Ubisoft. Then you have properly and truly immersive games that manage to convince the player that they are part of the world. Think of Elite Dangerous and even more rarer gems like Stray, or pretty much most VR games. And then, a step above immersion is atmospheric games. Games that craft their world so interesting and rich or gripping that you actively lose yourself. Even when it's by simply listening to an NPC playing a guitar. And that is where Stalker series is for me. Though, even at that time, Shadow of Chernobyl was not as graphically advanced as its shooter peers, having Half-Life 2 released nearly 3 years before and Crysis 1 releasing mere months after. There was still something captivating in the way Stalker crafted its world. I've remarked often how Stalker's sound design is a big part of why the world feels as alive and interesting as it is. Just a few distant sounds of what could be a man screaming in pain as he draws his last breath makes you immediately remember that distant beast sound before and think of, well, what could have happened? See, the tone of Stalker is dread and horror. Yet, like in good horror movies and games, you rarely, if ever, see the actual monster, rather than just getting jump scared by it constantly. While not an explicit horror game, the Soviet-era remnants, buildings, roads, and occasional statues or signs already were depressing as fuck when they were new. But add a few mutants, lack of civilization, and you truly feel like you're being left alone on an alien planet. And yet you're not. This is not some magical sci-fi land, but a real place with real technology and, surprisingly, real people. You see, a big part of why Airsoft audiences love Stalker so much is thanks to that grounded reality of it, and also maybe a little bit of that simplicity, with a tinge of that magical unknown. It's also a reason why, in comparison, Fallout, outside of some dedicated events, you rarely see. Now sure, Fallout is immersive, there's no question about it, but it's also cartoony, you know, for children. at least when you look at Stalker side by side. Still, everyone can get a cheap gas mask, plastic BB gun and a trench coat or a raincoat, and boom, you are a typical Stalker. It's both easy and appealing, and also fun. But anyways, back to atmosphere of Stalker games. See, sound wasn't the only one. Especially back in 2007, the daylight-night cycle and changing weather was a big part of it. While it wasn't unique, certainly for FPS games, it was rare. Sure, it was purely cosmetic. Still, it massively changed the tone of the zone. One moment you could have almost serene, beautiful midsummer sun shining on the bright leaves, uplifting your spirit. The next you could have downpour with lightning as you get chased by a goddamn pack of wild dogs. Like with movies and especially music, if you blast it full tilt off the gate, you got nowhere to go. But having highlights and lows is what amplifies each key moment. And then there's the coup de grace of the whole game series, both in technical and atmospheric level. The underground bases and the lighting itself. Going from drab, depressing rainstorm into a goddamn catacombs with minimal light and constant noises that echo throughout the whole complex is a pinnacle of horror. Or at least that's how it felt back in the day. See, lighting in these areas especially was very noticeable. And did you know that Stalker abused the fuck out of dynamic light sources? Yeah, it's rather interesting, cause you see, Half-Life 2 and the Source engine itself allowed something like maximum of 2 dynamic lights like this. Your flashlight and maybe one more. Everything else was a baked light, meaning that basically it was just a texture change. And then comes Stalker, says, "Ah, bled, hold my vodka, lightning strike, boom, dynamic lights, rotating warning signal, dynamic light, bled, and gunfire, oh, blah, you better believe it's a dynamic light, bled." Thanks to this, admittedly not very performance efficient approach, even if the models and textures at the time already felt their age, thanks to these dynamic lights, holds up so well. Shadow of Chernobyl and later games also featured a primitive early tessellation, but I won't go into the technical mumbo-jumbo, you probably don't care. But that's why most surfaces look more detailed than they actually are. But returning to atmosphere and the tone, it really is carried by the lighting, sound design, and real lived-in locations, even if stylized. Hell, even such little things as NPCs chatting, joking, or playing music adds to the desolate feeling that still is barely populated. And hey, personally I'd say that Shadow of Chernobyl beats countless immersive games thanks to just these 3 aspects alone. I just love it! As you immerse yourself into the zone, those who had not lived under USSR's oppression get to experience the utterly depressing and dismal feeling the Eastern Bloc was forced under. We already had mutants as is roaming the streets, we called them bombs, and magical anomalies were provided by teleporting juice and the secret police. As for radiation in the zone, well, it actually improved the situation. Now you had something to actually pay attention to. That's how bleak the USSR was. As for the countries that lived through the Russian bullshit, Russian bullshit in 20th century. The Russian bullshit we in the Soviet bloc got a bitter dark kind of nostalgia to enjoy, if you can even call it that. Still, while you could have a good world and tone, without the stuff to do in it, well, you just simply have a walking simulator that you play once and enjoy and never really return. So why do we replay Stalker? And in my case, why do I replay it so goddamn much? While not the only open world of its day for FPS games, Shadow of Chernobyl certainly was one of the very few and rare exceptions, especially in the more militaristic shooter section. You could go back to the very start, the rookie village, or travel between locations and simply explore or complete missions, or maybe just shoot some gopniks for fun. Like Fallout 3 releasing a year later, you could make your own story, cause sure as hell it wasn't the main storyline that captivated the audience. See, the story of Stalker, like the story of, for example, Skyrim, is so far forgotten that the main draw for people is the world and the things you can do in it. You could be whatever kind of a stalker you wanted to be. A free stalker, freedom, duty, even a military sympathizer, or a bandit gopnik. Be you S.T.A.L.K.E.R, S.K.E.R, or Major Alex, you don't care, you just go out there and do your own cheeky breeky. Sure, it is a failure of the story and writing and rush development, especially for Shadow Chernobyl and Clear Sky, that failed to set a proper and refined story, but it makes it all the more easier to dismiss them and forge your own. And because the game is not like linear shooters of the day, like Half-Life, Fear or Crysis, it stood apart. Well, until Fallout 3 came out. When everyone in the West started sucking Bethesda's wrinkly dick. But no, I actually quite like Fallout 3. In places. It's such a cool contrast between these two game series, while each providing a unique take on the post-apocalyptic genre, with radiation and mutants. It's also interesting to note that Stalker would eventually spawn Escape from Tarkov, and inevitably the whole genre of looter-shooter extraction games copycatting each other like it's some sort of incestuous British family. I mean, the British Royals started springing up from there on. But you see, the reason why Stalker was so much fun to play around in was the inventory system, loot, and that feeling of hauling the goods back to your chosen spot in the bar, or Freedom Base if you were stupid enough to join them.
The only group of truly free people.
Give me 5, bro. What's it gonna be? A hard drink or a soft smoke?
But there is no fast traveling and carrying too much. Unlike in Fallout and other Bethesda games, your character completely stops moving when you reach too much weight. And unlike in Fallout, traders and vendors don't have stupid limited money. God! It's like looking at the complete opposite. See, Bethesda, this is how you do the loot and inventory system properly, for fuck's sake! Anyways, as the proto-looter-shooter extraction game that rewarded you with gameplay while you're looting and even holding back the shit you got, rather than forcing you to look at countless loading screens as you fast travel from location to location or sit in a fucking bench while waiting for vendors to replenish money. Stalker is such a wonderful example of how to do things right. Or you can just load all the loot into the body and carry that across the map no matter how heavy it is. Yay, exploits! And then there was the hardcore aspect of the game that attracted the most try-hard, super serious players like flies on shit. The shooter mechanics. Looking back at the 3 games, they feel more like a kid's playground with plastic guns, rather than the gun-crazy every detail of survival mapped and mechanically over-designed thing that the mods turned the game into today. Still, weapon durability, food and drink necessities, limited inventory space that slows you down the more you're carrying, and most of all, weapon attachments were, well, not unique thing, still gave way for more depthful, slower and more tactical tone than most games before. Remember, Crysis and Modern Warfare 1, 2 games that had loads of gun customization and popularized this whole attachment mechanic for FPS games, were mere months away from this. Even so, the reason why, for example, in Escape from Tarkov gameplay you can see such an interaction with the gun in such a detail, like unjamming, checking the chamber magazine, switching the sights and much more, is thanks to that initial spark that in part Stalker and definitely its fanbase and modders cultivated. Even shooting the gun itself for the time was better thought out than just click and the gun goes boom. See, every weapon in Stalker shoots actual physical bullets as projectiles, rather than casting a ray like in laser tag, known as hit scanning. You can especially see this when you're using VSS, because that bullet is real slow and it drops really hard. On top of that, the gun's durability not only affected how well it would work, but also how often it would jam, and more importantly, how accurate it will be. See, even aiming down sights was affected by this. Yes, like in real life, guns and their bullets are not exactly 100% accurate bullet to bullet. Sort of a spread even when aiming down sights was reflected heavily in the gun's gameplay design. Hell, there was even different ammo types too. This level of detail further sparked fans and modders to push the boundary of shooter immersion and mechanical detail, so that today Stalker went from this to this. Oh, so cool! So, if you were into guns and their mechanical gameplay, Stalker was always at the top of the games you'd compare with. But okay, let's say that you don't care about the attachments, gun mechanics, and much more of that nerd shit. Okay, well guess what? Stalker still use these features to a very unique progression system. There are no leveling, no bullshit magical, oh, you now deal 10% more bullet damage. Again, much like the pretend RPG that Fallout 3 was. In Stalker games, the gear you got is your progression. By that I mean that you start the game with a shitty Makarov pistol. The iron sights are massive and the gun barely shoots straight, with a bullet that is closer to a teddy bear than a deadly projectile, while you're running around in a jeans and a t-shirt. Throughout the game, no matter how far you progress, this gun and the bullets it has will do the same damage, no matter how far you got or whatever your character lived through. There are no level ups. Instead, as you move forward through the game, you might find a weapon with a bigger magazine, or maybe automatic fire rate for easier shooting and faster shooting, or maybe one that uses bigger bullets for more power, or maybe you find something with a scope that allows you to aim further and better. And who knows, maybe you also find something that resembles some kind of body armor. But no matter what, that Kalashnikov bullet will hurt all the same, no matter what. And more importantly, enemies don't just magically bulk up just because you leveled up. See, very few games choose to use static and hard set gear as a progression rather than leveling systems. Well, mostly because gear-based progression is super hard to balance, especially for an open world. And leveling systems with level scaling enemies are just far too easy to make. So, for a lazy developer, it's really a no-brainer. Fallout 3. However, the games that choose to go the hard route, the rewards are noticeable. A consistent and fun progression with a world that actually feels consistent, almost set in stone, and you can trust it not to fuck you over. Moreover, the consistent gear is also a great way to motivate players to explore. For example, in the Rookie Village, you can find a hidden stalker suit that is better than your jeans and a t-shirt, and will protect your ass a little bit more, making those first bunch of encounters a little bit easier. Or, for example, that military outpost at the very start of the game. Now, you could try and kill the military, but it is really hard, especially since you only have a shitty pistol, and they have Krinkovs. But if by some miracle you manage to kill one of them, grab their rifle, now you're cooking with gasoline. Well, that is until you run out of the 10 bullets they had in the magazine, and you're fucked if you miss. God damn it, this game design feels genius, yet it's not. Ammo scarcity, consistent enemies, consistent gear, limited inventory, and no gameplay skipping shortcuts. It's just extra effort in part of the game designers, and it pays off so hard. Sure, Stalker is not a power fantasy, even till the very end. It's kind of also why it's great. You are not juiced up on levels, but thanks to a little bit of scavenging, again, loot and inventory system comes into play here quite a bit, because it's really up to you to choose how you engage with missions. Either by speedrunning mentality, using that Makarov as a combat suggestive rather than a weapon, or you can spend some time exploring and meticulously gathering gear, building up your arsenal, and the reward is a lot easier time. It balances out. And do I need to point to Soulsborne games for the same idea to drive point harder than a random javelin approaching Su-35 fighter planes? Consistency. This is what makes even the end games of each of the 3 games so much fun to fuck around in, and why mods made the game even more amazing. Well, what's more there to say? Stalker games succeeded due to genuine great atmosphere and setting. The world really encompassed that grounded, yet a little bit magical and certainly dangerous tone. Those anomalies are still amazing to this day. Utilizing horror aspects that could only exist thanks to certain technological feats, yet there is still a tinge of dumb fun and silliness. Mostly thanks to random Gopniks being proper debiles. Backed by great open world design that doesn't fall apart as you pull a thread out of a sweater, and surprisingly depthful mechanics that attract the hardcore FPS enthusiasts. But because it's not a straight super serious military shooter, everyone is welcome. Even the random Gopnik can join in. Which is why, especially in Airsoft, you always find a fellow Stalker rather than a Fallout or Mad Max or Call of Duty player. Jesus, I didn't even mention how far the modders have taken the concept of, oh, hey, my gun can jam, oh, and I can improve it, and hell, I can change the barrels and restore it and improve it and put more stuff onto it. Oh my god! Or hell, the visuals themselves. So, if you've never played Stalker, it is worth your time, even just as an urban explorer, to go to the exclusion zone and feel the Soviet-era time capsule. It does have that unique, melancholy tinge that's just so alluring. Oh, and GSC, thank you tremendously for the deeply flawed yet incredible games. And as for Stalker 2, well, we'll see how that goes when it releases.
Boom, boom.